الحمد بعد الرضا حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه. اللهم صل وسلم على حبيبك وعبدك المختار سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا وتجاوز عن سيئاتنا. اللهم اغفر لصغيرنا وكبيرنا وذكرنا وأنثانا وشاهدنا وغائبنا. بارك اللهم لنا في أرزاقنا وفي أعمالنا وفي أعمالنا وفي أهلنا وذوينا وأحبابنا. بارك اللهم لنا في ذرياتنا. بارك اللهم لنا في ذرياتنا. أصلح أولادنا. اللهم أصلح أسرنا. اللهم املأ قلوبنا وبيوتنا بنورك ورحمتك وهداك. اللهم أصلحنا وأصلح بنا. اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سببا لمن اهتدى. Oh Allah, we call upon you, we pray to you and we beseech you in this gathering in your house as individuals and as families. We ask you by your names and attributes to bless us and to bless our lives and livelihood and to bless our families and to fill our hearts and our homes with your guidance, with your mercy and with your nur. We ask you, Allah, to guide us and to guide our children. We ask you, Allah, to guide the families to your pleasure, to guide spouses to your pleasure, to guide our children to your pleasure, and to make us of those steadfast upon the right path, to fill our homes with barakah and goodness, and to push away from our homes friction and division and the influence of the shaitan. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen, wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. I'll pass it over you to Ustaz Ahmed to get us started, inshallah.
Okay, so some logistical things first for the program. So we're going to get started now close to 7:30. Notice that there is babysitting downstairs. There'll be two sections. If you have children 8 or younger about, go to the babysitting section. If you have a boy that is above 8 but you don't want him to be running around up here, we do have a section for them. We have something prepared for them. If you have a girl that's above 8, it's probably best they can keep them up here. And of course, if you have somebody that's younger and you do want them to stay up here, please feel free, just as long as you can keep them steady and quiet throughout. So we'll have this interview for about 30 to 45 minutes. Inshallah, we'll have a little bit of Q&A afterwards, and we'll have some food and refreshments after that. And we'll go from there. So why we did this format in the first place, I am not a scholar, I'm just a member of the community. I know many of you here. The idea here is it's supposed to be that instead of the Shaykh just giving a lecture and talking about things from a Shaykh's theoretical point of view, I'm representing the community, asking questions like one of you guys. And why we chose this topic of family, I think I'll just let the Shaykh actually start. So I'll ask the first question, why should we focus on family in the first place?
Jazakallah khair, Ustaz Ahmed. For me, I believe that in order for us to begin to have the conversation about how to really deal with a lot of the struggles that a lot of the youth are dealing with, especially the up-and-coming generation, but in fact everyone for that matter, the subject of family needs to be examined on a deep level. Because, our family relationships are the most intimate relationships we have. They deeply impact us. They end up shaping up our identity. Who are we? What am I inclined to? What does my character look like? A lot of that is established at home. And, this is so true because this was the case for our beloved Prophet ﷺ. It's the place where you find that the Prophet was told carries greatest responsibility. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even tells us this in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاللَّهُ جَعَلَ لَكُم مِّن بُيُوتِكُمْ سَكَنًا. Allah made for you from your homes a place of tranquility and peace. And there's some power in that. It tells us that we as human beings earnestly search for peace in our lives. That's actually part of why we're called human beings. I don't know if you knew that, but actually insan in Arabic is taken from either uns or لِنِسْيَانِهِ. أنسه لحاجته للأنس, for his need to find uns, and uns is like peace inward. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the home as a place of uns. We call it a place of sakan. Sakan is a reference to home. So, I really think that in order to address a lot of the mental health struggles, emotional struggles, spiritual problems that people have, the subject starts at home. The most complicated relationships are the ones that are most involved with the people that we have at home. parents, children, siblings with each other, sometimes spouses with each other, and so on and so forth. Allahu A'lam.
Okay, so we see the importance of family, and I think so. Then we all start to think, okay, family should be a source of tranquility. But I think, especially here in the West, we have this huge generation gap, right? A lot of our parents are coming from other countries. They don't understand the technology of today. It seems to be a disconnect where we just can't understand each other. At the same time, there's a lot of divorced households. Sometimes there's abusive family members. With the way the financial systems are right now, a lot of families are struggling financially. Kids are not happy with the ability of their parents to provide and things like that, and vice versa. Parents are strict on their kids as far as how they should be providing and things like that. And also then, even if all that's working well, let's say there's a great cohesive family, there's a good financial situation, everything like that, there could be a lack of Islamic, the Islamic values are not being upheld in the family the way that some of us would like to be. So it just seems like there's never this ideal or perfect family. If we start to feel like our family's just not ideal, how should we start to think about that?
Well, you make a lot of great points, and I think to start out, the entry point to this subject, if our families aren't perfect, we must realize and we must treat them as a dynamic that isn't perfect. And if someone's searching for any dynamic that's perfect in life, they're not going to find it, really. It's so easy for people to just give up on things and turn their back and try to find an easy way out. But, really the true growth happens when you actually invest in something. I think part of the blessing of family is that the family dynamic is far from perfect. I think that's part of the blessing. At first glance, someone might say, what are you talking about? How could it be a blessing to deal with a difficult family member or a very troubling situation? And the way I would answer that is, look at the Prophet's life. I said this in many of my khutab. What made the Prophet's life special? Was it that his life was easy? Was it that everything was made for him and figured out? Was it that he had miraculous intervention at every twist and turn? No, it wasn't. It wasn't at all. Actually, the reason why his life is so special is because it's so real. He had to overcome some immense struggles. He was blessed with having to deal with the likes of Abu Lahab. Having an antagonist in your life sometimes teaches you so much about yourself and how to overcome adversity. Overcoming adversity is not something, or learning how to overcome adversity is not something that a person's born with. So I think that part of the blessing in our families having sometimes difficult dynamics is that they give us opportunities for growth. And that's what our humanity is all about. Growth isn't easy. It's not meant to be easy, even though we wish it would be.
Is there, actually bring up Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, is there, can you provide some examples of how he dealt with difficult struggles within his family? I don't know if there's stories about how he dealt with struggles with his children, for example. We can go maybe start there and see if we want to go beyond that.
Well, in terms of the Prophet's struggles, you name it, you could find something you can relate to in your life, in the Prophet ﷺ's life. And that's part of why his life is so special, so beautiful. When you talk about the subject of loss, one of the most difficult things to imagine is a parent losing a son or daughter, and a lot of people have to do with that. Sometimes loss is, in the sense that, they die at a young age, but sometimes loss is in a different sense, so that, their son or daughter gets caught up in things and they can't help them. And sometimes that's even, much more difficult than actually having them pass away at a young age, even though that's so difficult. The Prophet ﷺ, for his example, Prophet ﷺ had to deal with the loss of all his children during his lifetime, except one. Only one survived him. That was the Sayyidah Fatima. She passed away 6 months after he passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just think of that. That's in terms of his children. If you want to talk about the other types of loss relating to children, when it comes to misguidance, look at Nuh alayhi salam. Perfect example. The best da'i you could think of, trying to convince his son, just open your eyes, man. Just believe. Didn't want to listen. stubbornly, defiantly persisted, and he was drowned. That's so that's something that I would consider relating to loss. You could, if you think about other struggles, you could find a whole lot of other examples in terms of poverty. The Prophet ﷺ wasn't poor, but he was so generous and he was so detached from material things that he had to deal with very minimal circumstances at home. They say that the Prophet ﷺ never ate from bread for 2 consecutive days in his home throughout his lifetime. That the Prophet ﷺ, that was his dynamic. It's a tough one, and the list goes on and on. Yeah.
So how did his kids deal with that? With the struggles when if they didn't have bread for 2 days in a row and things like that, and how did he deal with not being able to give his kids everything in this dunya, but because he was doing it for
I like
reasons.
that question. I'll see. Can you do that after? Because I could hear you from here. The way I would address that, I really like that question, because I'm sure that every father and maybe even mother is concerned about how to provide for their children. You start financially planning. I need to start working maybe 12 hours a day. I need to put a certain fund aside for their college, and I need to become like a workhorse. And that's a scary thing to become, because if the father becomes a money bank and he no longer has that tarbiyah relationship with his son or daughter, then they'll quickly lose their purpose in their children's lives. Getting back to your question, the Sayyidah Fatima actually shows us in her example as a daughter what the Prophet meant to her, even though he couldn't really necessarily give her much material possessions. She was the most beloved of the Prophet. You don't need money, you don't need gifts, you don't need material things to win a person's heart over. No, in fact, sometimes when you give all that material, get all those material possessions, and you don't have a relationship, you might find that actually has the opposite effect. There's an interesting verse in the Quran, Akhi Ahmed. It says, وَلَوْ بَسَطَ اللَّهُ الرِّزْقَ لِعِبَادِهِ لَبَغَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ. If Allah had given blessings in great abundance to His servants, you would find that it goes from being a blessing to becoming actually a source of great regret. And how is that? You could see it with children sometimes. If you give them too much, sometimes it corrupts the character. It ruins them. So Sayyidah Fatima, getting back to the point, actually loved her father so much that she began to mimic his behavior. One of the signs of love is that you actually begin acting like the person you love, in your mannerisms, in the way you talk, in your perspectives on things. And Sayyidah Aisha says this, مَا رَأَيْتُ أَحَدًا أَشْبَهَ بِرَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ مِنْ فَاطِمَةٍ. I haven't seen anyone more like the Prophet than Fatima. That shows us what real love is. It's not coming from money. Sometimes, people make fatal decisions for themselves. Should I work 70, 80 hours a week and lose my children in the process? Yeah, I'll get them through college, but then, I'll absolutely have no relationship with them. What good is that for their dunya and my akhirah?
So it's basically the theme there is that we should be focusing on making sure that it's not about giving them the dunya things, it's about giving them much more than that, the spiritual satisfaction and love and other kinds of things like that. So shifting to dealing with the kids and on the topic of how to deal with religion in the family. So I think one of the issues that we're having a lot of times here is in the 21st century, the kids here, we're living here in the West. Any time the kids go to school, alcohol is abundant amongst society. Haram relationships are very common. If you're not in a haram relationship, you're kind of strange. Wearing a hijab is a struggle. On a daily basis, you're getting more than looks, at least bad looks, and a lot of other negative consequences. And sometimes it feels like for the parents, it's a struggle to even get their kids to care about something. And the kids seem like this is too hard. You're just not understanding what world we're living in. You're living on a different planet. How should we start to think about these kinds of struggles?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not an easy thing. It's definitely raising children. You know what? Changing the way a person feels about something or looks at something is actually a difficult thing. Penetrating a person's heart, actually influencing them, winning them over, that's something, that requires a lot of skill. Our Prophet ﷺ had that skill. He knew how to penetrate hearts. And that's how, effective he was. If you want to look at the Prophet ﷺ's life, I said this in a recent khutbah, it's just about a set of relationships, interactions that great people had with the greatest human being. That's Rasulullah ﷺ. And he completely changed their lives for the better. When it talks about, when we're talking about actually doing that with our children, overcoming those struggles you mentioned about, drugs and drug abuse, alcohol, illicit relationships. You know what? You need to add a few things to that list too, like mental health struggles, which is really a big struggle that people are dealing with. People resorting to hurting themselves, having suicidal thoughts, and so on and so forth. When we're having that discussion, the first step in resolving that is starting a healthy conversation. Sometimes it's not about, giving 101 lectures. And that's like a message I'd, share with parents. Beware of just becoming the lecture person to your son or daughter. Yeah, you want to teach them a lot of things, but the most ineffective way you could do that possibly is to give them a lecture every single time you see them. That's the most ineffective way. In fact, that's something that our Prophet ﷺ had in mind. The Prophet ﷺ, as Abu Hurairah mentions, Abu Hurairah, a very great and distinguished companion, he was asked by his students, why don't you give us a reminder every day? We love this. We want to hear you more. We want to benefit from your knowledge. So he said to them, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يتخولنا بالموعظة مخافة السآم علينا. The Prophet used to be very particular in how when he would deliver to us a reminder so that we don't get bored, right? So the Prophet ﷺ started conversations with those around him. You know what? And this is tragic. Sometimes it happens in a lot of families. If the only conversations I ever have with my children are negative ones, when they do things wrong, okay, the father absolutely is in his own world and he's only brought in when the son or daughter does something bad, that's tragic. You know what? When we're talking about communicating, starting conversations, there's no way you could penetrate a person's heart, if there isn't a deep sense of love there. And if that deep sense of love is not communicated. You know what it reminds me of? There was one time during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Al-Hasan al-Hussein, they came to the Prophet, and the Prophet embraced them and hugged them. He expressed love. And there was a Bedouin Arab there, and he said, تُقَبِّلُونَ صِبْيَانَكُمْ. What are you doing? You're hugging your kids? Why would you do that? You're training them to be weak. Why are you training them to be weak like that? They need to be tough. They're young men. They're boys. You need to treat them like young men. So then the Prophet he said to the Prophet, I have 10 kids. I've never once hugged a single one of them. The Prophet ﷺ said to him, what could I do to you if Allah stripped mercy from your heart? Sometimes parents, maybe fathers, or maybe mothers, more likely fathers, might not express enough love to their children. And it actually creates a lot of barriers between them. So that's, I think, an important message in terms of starting this. It's not always about talking about why alcohol is haram. It's about how to build a bond with this person who might get swept up in these types of things. You might help them avoid a lot of pain if you just have a good relationship with them. Yeah.
So I think, to harp on the point, the important point is not to be the type that's lecture. And I think especially in our community, we all know that's a very common theme with the parents. A lot of times they know how to do is just to lecture, right? So I think one of the answers you're saying is to turn it into a direction of, well, first of all, show more love and make it come from a place of compassion more, right?
Yeah.
But then to start the conversation, well, what about parents who are thinking, like, I'm not a professional communicator here. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know how to do it. So how can they go about starting to have these kinds of conversations and things like that? So I think you said step one is to come from a more empathetic place and a more place of love. But beyond that, how can you go further? How can you actually start to have these conversations for just a regular person who's not trained in how to, be great at this kind of thing? And again, especially with the barrier in the generations here, where the parents talking to a kid that's living in a different world than them sometimes here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think, one thing to consider in this regard, uh, our personal development really should never finish. That's why I'm happy to see a lot of older people in the audience here. If I ever once think that I don't need to make myself better, then that's the beginning of my demise. That's when it starts going downhill. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is they say, someone who is void of something can't really transfer it to someone else. فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه. And, some of these things don't need to be they don't need expert training, they don't need degrees. They just need a level of humanity. You know what? If my sense of humanity is mutilated because of a million and one things on my mind, and stress and anxiety and anger and conflicts and feuds, and I'm not really at peace with myself on the inside, you better believe it. That's going to impact all of my relationships around. So I think it really starts from the individual. That's why, they always say, for those, considering marriage, starting a home, it really, takes a big personal investment. I need to build myself up. I need to be able to train myself in a way that I could actually give something substantial to my children when I have children. I don't think it really, you don't need to be taught to love. You don't need to be taught to be empathetic. You just need to make sure you don't lose it in the process with everything that happens in life. Because, our decisions, the way we choose to live, ends up changing who we are. So we need to make sure that in the process, I maintain those core values, that sense of spirituality. It's a good sunnah, you know what? To make dua for your children. A lot of the times, when in conflicts, a parent might make dua against their children. It's an awful thing, because ثلاثة لا ترد دعوتهم. There are three people, their prayers aren't turned away. One of them is دعوة الوالد على ولده. The dua of a parent against their son or daughter. You know what? I need to ask myself right now, if I've ever done that, how many times have I made dua for that son or daughter? I need to make it a part of my life. I need to make it a part of who I am, constantly making dua for my children, and in my sujood, in my prayers, constantly making dua for them and with them. Allah alam.
So again, I think it sounds like the big summary here, which is the important part, is again, it's the idea of I think how you started off in a few questions ago about the idea of connecting with the heart, not so much about making a logical thing. Very similar to Dawah and stuff, that how Islam enters the heart for people. It's not as much a logical thing sometimes. It's about making that connection the way Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would make people trust his heart, and then you'll be able to actually guide them in a better way. So to start with step one, as making your children or your other family members actually connect and have a love and affection towards you, and to build the trust from that standpoint. Is that a fair summary, basically?
Yeah, I would say so. You could convince the mind all you want. The mind's only an advisor. Who's really in charge? The heart. If you don't convince the heart, then you've lost the battle. And that's something important to keep in mind. You could speak to a person's mind all you want, but if you don't speak to their heart, then you won't be able to change behavior. You could win a bunch of arguments, and you could show your son or daughter how what they're doing is so wrong and damaging, but they might continue to do it. And if you see that, then maybe the problem lies in where their heart is. It's not where you're speaking, it's somewhere else.
Okay, so shifting away from the parent-to-child dynamic is just more for the other types of family members. So staying on the topic of religion in the family, it seems like there's never a standard way, right? It's never usually like if there's a we'll call it a close to ideal practicing member in the family. Usually it's not consistent across the family, right? Sometimes you're going to have a sibling that's not going to be that great. Sometimes, you got married, you didn't care that much about Islam. A wife might have started to care more about Islam, but her husband didn't get there, or vice versa. Again, differences with the siblings. Sometimes you're getting more, you're starting to care more about Islam, but your parents aren't there, and they're starting to have conflicts with you. And there does seem to be this divide a lot of times when someone starts to care about Islam and other members of the family aren't there, and that seems to cause a lot of division. If you start to talk about how they can start to approach that issue.
Yeah, a lot of the things that you're mentioning now, they're not black and white. They're circumstance based. They're case by case. That's the important thing to remember here. Da'wah is an art form. If I realize that my relationship with my family at a certain level is a form of da'wah as well, I need to keep that in mind. There's no, sometimes people, they just take a tell it as it is approach. That's very wrong, because it lacks wisdom. You know how they define wisdom? They say it's not only to do what should be done, it's to do it the way it should be done, the time it should be done. The truth needs to be packaged in a certain way. Just because it's the truth doesn't mean you get to say it whatever way you want. And sometimes that's the struggle with, so sometimes, a lot of the times, people look at it the way that you just mentioned. Oh, we have a person that became more quote-unquote religious-minded in the family, and they might be struggling with a mother, a father, a sibling that doesn't have that same understanding. Sometimes the problem might be in the person itself, and that person themselves, in their manner of expressing their new realizations, if you want me to say. And what I mean by that is sometimes when the person, is new to spirituality, new to tadayyun, they have a certain zealousness. They start seeing things in binaries. Haqq, batil, haram, halal. This is prohibited, this is allowed. Truth and falsehood. And sometimes they might be the cause for pushing someone away from truth. They might be the obstacle in the way of their family member. So that needs to, and the reason why I'm saying that is, so these things need to be delicately managed. Sometimes the best way to deal with a certain situation is not to address it head on, is to actually address all of the surrounding things, and you might find that the circumstance changes by itself. So, just to give an example, like someone, a brother might become religious, quote unquote, and his sister doesn't wear hijab. And this might really irk him, irritate him. He might have a few conversations with her and reprimand her and speak harshly with her and actually get frustrated. Hey, how come she's so misguided? Well, in this case, the most misguided thing is probably his approach. Sometimes that's the case, So again, it's a dynamic thing, but I just, most likely everyone here is probably in that boat. You came to the masjid now, you came for salah. You might have to be the one who's dealing with family dynamics where maybe perhaps you need to give da'wah to your mother, your father, or a sibling, or a spouse, and you need to keep these types of things in mind.
Well, okay, so then what if it gets to the point where it's not even as much that you're trying to give da'wah to them and you see it's not working or it's frustrating you, that you just tend to see because now there's a person who's focused on this thing in life, which is Islam, and others who might not have that kind of care, it causes a drift in that family. So then all of a sudden now you're just not going to be, you're just thinking, I'm just not that close with these people because we don't share the same viewpoints, this kind of thing.
That's Jazakallah khair. That's a really good question. All right, so and I'll just add to it. Sometimes some people, the way they see it is, you know what, my family is really bringing me down. Every time I go and I'm with my friends or I'm in the masjid, I feel, lighthearted. I feel life is good. I feel good about myself. I feel more spiritual. When I go home, it's so toxic. I feel depressed about life. It's ruining my iman. I don't want to deal with these people anymore. Now, if they were friends, I would say, all right, there's no issue in having a discussion about moving on from a friendship that you feel is weighing you down. But one of the most difficult things that should be in a person's life is for a person to turn their back on a family member, especially if that family member is a mother or a father. And I know that a lot of the young people in the audience might not want to hear this, but I can't just put an X on my mother, my father. These people, they're oppressors, they're bad human beings, I'm not going to deal with them. You can't do that. You can't do that to something that Allah Azza wa Jal has given a certain status that's right after Tawheed, right? وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. You can't turn your back on your parents, no matter how bad they are. You need to manage that relationship and you need to confront that difficulty. Doesn't mean you need to do whatever someone wants. Doesn't mean you need to accept abuse or oppression. No, that doesn't mean that. No, of course not. And those types of situations, sometimes you need to involve someone else. Sometimes you need to consult someone to see how to manage a difficult situation. The easiest thing to do is just to cut out the dead weight and just leave everyone behind and go seek your own prosperity. But that's not the way that the person's going to grow. I've dealt with a lot of people who had those struggles, especially with parents. And my response always takes us back to a point, well, you know what? This life is quickly fading away. Your parents, how old are they? They're in their 60s, they're in their 70s. When they leave this dunya, what do you want your relationship to look like with them when they leave? I can't help but keep on remembering this brother. I remember a brother. You know what? If you're having difficulty with your relationship with your parents, go sit down with someone who lost their mother or their father or both. It'll give you perspective. I remember this brother. He's an older brother. He was telling me, he was talking about his mother. She had passed away. And he said, after she passed away, I started remembering every time I broke her heart and left her crying, and I wish that she could just come back for a moment and I could just fix it. That's perspective, because that's what life is. How many people, their last interaction with another human being was on a negative note, and they'll carry that with them the rest of their lives. Allah Alam.
Okay, so yeah, I guess towards that direction, but I guess then getting away from the topic of particularly religion and the family dynamics, just other difficulties that not to do with religion, just the idea that there's a lot of argumentation. So I think a lot of times, sometimes kids are feeling like their parents are just too much and too controlling and that kind of thing. And, they might even recognize, like, I know this is my parent, I love them and everything like that, and I want the best for them, but it's just too much. So then again, they also feel like I don't want to argue with them all the time. So again, you just have this distance. And it's not because you don't love them, it's not because you're not going to miss them, but you just feel like it's too much of a negative emotion in my life. And then you start to notice that the people aren't spending as much time with their families, then it's breaking apart the family cohesion, right?
Yeah.
And how can they think that? So if you've started to already touch on this, but if you want to go a little further on that.
Yeah, sure. So again, a lot of these types of things need to be negotiated. What am I dealing with exactly? Is it abuse? Or is it just a difficult personality? Is it...
Think more on the difficult personality types.
Yeah, like on a personal level, each person needs to start asking themselves a series of questions. Why am I going through this type of situation at home? How much am I contributing to this? I need to think about it objectively. Sometimes I might not be able to see it, no matter how objective I try to be. I need to talk to someone about it. And, maybe perhaps something I'm doing is contributing to this. I need to figure out basically how I can troubleshoot this. And I need to keep on trying to do that. And is there a situation where perhaps the solution for their problem might be to reduce interaction, or to reduce interaction on certain subjects? Yeah, that's possible. Is it possible that perhaps I'll make a decision where I'll no longer have financial dealings with family members because it always goes down a negative? That's a possible outcome to certain situations. But again, all of this stuff needs to be processed very deeply. It shouldn't be very hastily done. It's not an easy thing to do. You can't really give a cookie cutter answer to this type of thing. All right, well, say for example, my relationship with my father, مثلا, for example, might get difficult and complicated when I start opening certain subjects. Maybe, and I know, and this is something that every son or daughter needs to realize. Well, you know what? My father's 50, 60, 70. His behavior, the likelihood of it fundamentally changing is not very probable. And you know what? Me dealing with this circumstance actually might end up paying off in different regards in terms of developing who I am as a person and developing my character. Again, difficult situations build character. So maybe perhaps my relationship with my father will change in that I'll avoid that thing that makes my father difficult, but I'll still deal with him in other regards, right? The worst thing that a person could possibly do is not realize the status of a certain relationship in his or her life. You know what? Sometimes, children do this. I'm dealing with my mother, my father. What they're saying is pure ignorance. They're foolish, right? And I'm going to say that to them just like I would say it to my friend. That's wrong. That's wrong to not... that's something that society today actually projects and promotes. There's no such thing as status and varying levels. You don't respect anyone. You just do you, and you pursue your dreams and fight for your rights, and that's it. But our deen doesn't teach that. Our deen teaches that, we need families and we need them to thrive, or else society is going to crumble. And I need to be part of the solution. I can't be part of the problem. Allah.
So, I guess back to a general type of thing. What are some of the negative consequences if people are thinking they're doing it for their own peace and sake of mind, they are distancing themselves from their families because they feel it's negative? What are the negative consequences to that for an Islamic family, for the Islamic community, and I guess Islam broadly?
What are the negative consequences to it? I'll share this. I'll share this. This anecdote from the life of one of the tabi'een. His name was Iyas ibn Muawiyah. I shared it recently in a khutbah. Iyas ibn Muawiyah had a mother. He was very benevolent to his mother. She passed away. When she passed away, he was crying. His students asked him, "Why are you crying?" They thought that maybe perhaps he's not taking it really well. He's not accepting what Allah decreed. But then he gave them perspective. He said, كَانَ لِي بَابَانِ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ مَفْتُوحًا. I had 2 doors to Jannah open. And now today, when my mother died, one of those doors closed. What decision does this son or daughter make for themselves when they decide to, I'm going to just distance myself? Especially when it's a parent that you're talking about. You're missing out on a lot of goodness. And there's no way that goodness can ever be replaced. Regardless of the condition of your mother and her relationship with Allah Azza wa Jalla, she has a certain right upon you, whether it's believing or unbelieving. And that's something the Prophet established. When Asma came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, "My mother came to me and she wants to see me, and she's a mushrikah. She doesn't believe in you." So the Prophet ﷺ said to her, "Fortify kins with your mother." No, that's a relationship you can't turn your back on, right? So, what are you missing out on? And you're missing out on the dua. You might actually be getting a whole lot of pain your way. You know what? Because sometimes the situations in life are cyclical. You do something today and you decide something today, you might find that you might deal with it yourself tomorrow. It's something, a son or daughter should keep in mind, because one day they'll have children.
Okay, so how about even beyond just the parent-child relationship, also the same issue with distancing from certain siblings? I think especially too with like cousins and family-cousin relationships. I think we all know there's a lot of families that say, "I don't talk to these cousins," and these families don't talk and things like that. Should that also be considered under the important cohesive family that needs to be Islamically upheld?
Yeah, absolutely. At all costs, those types of relationships, sometimes it becomes. All right, well, I don't talk to my uncle, I don't talk to my aunt. Why? Because my parents told me not to, because our families are fighting with each other. And that type of foolishness, unfortunately, is so damaging. Sometimes it even happens between spouses, by the way. The children are on the side of the mother, so they don't talk with the father, because the mother is mad at the father, and so she trains the children to not be good with the father. And that's something that'll come back to haunt the mother, by the way. Because if the children are trained to disrespect their father today, they're going to disrespect their mother tomorrow. If the children are taught that there's no value in maintaining relationships with your aunts and uncles, and it's okay to just put an X on certain individuals just because of certain affiliations. We can't even do that with, sometimes people do that foolishly with friendships as well. I got into a fight with Fulan. You're my friend, you should hate Fulan too. You should stop talking to Fulan. It's so ignorant. But sometimes people do that. How could you talk to Fulan? He did this to me. She did that to me, right? And that type of association is it's really toxic. I'll tell you, I think that a lot of the times people are the engineers of their own pain, with the decisions they make. Some things that, people put weights on their shoulders that are totally unnecessary. Wallah alam, that's how I perceive it. There's nothing better than, the Prophet ﷺ says it. Who are the people of Jannah going to be? They are كل هين لين ضعيف متضعف. Every person is just a very simple person, not an abrasive person, not an aggressive person, an easygoing person, not a person who's always feuding with this person, cutting off that person, and so on and so forth. A lot of things in life just be easy, they'll be figured out.
Okay, so I know you're getting probably a lot of Q&As on these types of topics right now, right? So I'm thinking, should we do one more question or should we keep going for even longer?
Sure, we could do one more question and then I'll give you this.
Okay.
So you could give their questions.
Okay. Well, one I definitely wanted to get to was when I was reading your notes about the youth and that kind of topic. So I think this is always one that parents struggle with when they should start trying to talk to their kids seriously and start bringing up Islam seriously, or just important things in life. And they're thinking, if they're 10, they're 11 years old, they're not ready. They're not going to, their mind's not here. They're not even going to hear what I'm saying. I should just wait until they're actually mature enough to be able to handle this kind of stuff. What can we learn from the Sunnah about how we should start to look at the way, when we should start trying to instill Islam into our children, and how harsh we should be with it when they're young?
I'm not sure I would use the word harsh, but I know what you mean. And I think that it needs a subject by a day by itself. Maybe perhaps we could just dedicate it to, like a conversation about the youth and what makes that age bracket so unique and having so much potential. I guess something I would say in this regard is, there are, and if you've attended community hubs in the past, you might know this answer. Let's see. There are 4 companions that are referred to as Al-Abadila Al-Arba'. And these are 4 companions. Their names are Abdullah. And they passed away, the Prophet ﷺ passed away when they were hardly teenagers. Right? So they were very young companions. But it doesn't stop there. They actually were scholars and leaders among the Sahaba. That they were held in such high regard even among the elders among the companions. And these are individuals who they had some interactions with the Prophet ﷺ, and he actually laid the foundations of their development. And there's others you could add to this list, but who are the 4? You guys, anyone know who the 4 are? The 4 Abdullahs, who are they? Abdullah ibn Umar, 1. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, 2. Who else? Abdullah ibn Abbas, 3. It's already said Abdullah ibn Umar. There's one more. No, not Ibn Rawaha, no. Aywa, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. Those are the 4. They were hardly Ibn Abbas, he's probably the oldest one of them. He was 13 when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. That's perspective. Anas ibn Malik, again, a person who the Prophet ﷺ raised as a young boy. This Anas ibn Malik became one of the most prolific narrators of hadith. He actually became a member of the Prophet ﷺ's family. Like, he grew up around the Prophet ﷺ's household, right? The subject's big. Even when you want to go to the Quran, go to the Quran. Look at Ismail when he says to his son Ismail, فَانظُرْ مَاذَا تَرَى, tell me what you think, right? So I've seen a few examples of this. When parents make the decision to treat their young children as decision makers when they're very young, it usually pays off big time in developing their personality when they grow up. One of the toxic things that is in some cultural backgrounds is if you're the young one in the crowd, you need to shut up. You can't open your mouth. When we go over the people's house, You can't talk. What do you mean? You're 10 years old. You're going to sit down and talk when you have adults having conversation? You sit in the corner and you wait till the visit's done. You could have some tea. You could have some water. You could have some sweets, but just be quiet. You don't talk when we go by your uncle's house or your aunt's house or whatever. You don't do that. That's toxic. That's awful. And the biggest sign of that is when you look at the Prophet ﷺ's behavior with young people in his life. I gave in the khutbah, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, that young man who was sitting on the Prophet ﷺ's right-hand side, and the Prophet ﷺ had a vessel, and the Prophet ﷺ, there was elders among the companions in the gathering. He wanted to drink from it a little and pass it on. So he said, أَتَأْذَنُ لِي أَنْ أُعْطِيَهُ الْأَشْيَاخِ, you give me permission to give it to the older people first? So this young boy was smart. He said, مَا كُنْتُ لِأُوثِرَ بِفَضْلِ مِنْكَ أَحَدًا. I am not going to give anyone priority to drinking after you over me. I want to drink right after you. They love the Prophet. Sometimes today people, that's nasty. It's disgusting. What are they doing? Germs, and especially in the age of Corona. But the point is, they love the Prophet. The Prophet respected this young man. If I don't respect my children, how do I expect them to respect themselves? No, they're not going to respect themselves. They're going to sell themselves very cheaply by sending inappropriate, pictures of themselves to a guy if they're a girl, or get into a haram relationship if they're a guy or a girl. And they're going to degrade themselves by following a friend into an addiction or doing something humiliating or so on. They're not going to respect themselves. I never trained them to respect it. I never trained them to be independent and make decisions on their own. That's a devastating thing if a parent does that. Allah Alam.
Okay, well then just to close on that real quick then, so to follow up then, so it's important to try to treat them seriously, I guess I'll phrase it that way, when they're young. So what if the parents are noticing, but they're saying, I just, look, my kid is not going to pay, they're just not ready right now. They're not ready, they're not understanding anything serious that comes out of my mouth. They're really just running around, they're playing. It's a waste of time right now. I'm actually worried it's going to make them hate me more, and it's going to make this divide between us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that, if they think like that, then their approach more than likely is probably not going to be on point either. When we're talking about having conversations, we're not talking about giving lectures. When we're talking about training to be a decision maker, we're not saying, some families, some parents, sometimes they're put in a situation where they think that the best decision is to just allow their children to choose whatever they want for themselves, even if it's something awful, as long as they know about it. Right? Some parents, they choose that. Or, it's okay if he or she is in a haram relationship as long as it's under my supervision, because I'm afraid if I say something, they're not going to share things with me anymore. Anyway, I know you're not asking about that particularly, but, in general, I think that, there needs to be some investment on the parent's side into learning how to communicate with their son or daughter. Hey, you know what? If I'm making this type of investment in terms of my time and money and building an estate and making a business, buying a house, buying a car, why can't I make the same type of investment in actually learning how to influence this little human being that I brought into this dunya? Right? So no, there's a way to communicate with children effectively, and to actually have these types of discussions with them in a way that's appropriate for their age. Yeah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. So is it time you think we should shift over to questions? I think we're getting close to 40 minutes-ish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have a request here. All right, here's the first one. Ya Rab.
Okay, it's a really deep question, so I'm just going to read it as is, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to interpret it otherwise. The topic of the heart and mind was touched upon. However, the battle between the heart and mind is one of the biggest challenges a human can face. Wanting something, but your heart knows it's wrong, is very hard to neglect. How can this be applied through giving dawah to another family member? In other words, wanting to give it, but you know you'll get shut down and there's going to be no benefit because of ignorance or some other reason. Also, how do we approach this in general? And how did the Prophet ﷺ experience this?
All right, so I would redefine one thing, and and I would also just adjust another thing. So the thing I would redefine is the understanding of da'wah. When we mention da'wah, we don't mean da'wah in the sense that I need to have a conversation and give perspective to a person necessarily on what they're doing that's very wrong, or what they should be doing that is actually really hurting them. That's not necessarily what da'wah is. Da'wah is partially being a good person, being a good example, living what you're saying, just inspiring a person, giving them hope, building connections with them, being a good support for them in their struggles. That's a big form of da'wah actually, and sometimes that's way more effective than the other one. Yeah, you could have a conversation with a person and tell them, how if they don't start praying and they don't start praying soon, then this and this and that is going to happen to them. Or you could actually win this person's heart over and actually make them love you, and they'll actually be interested in hearing what you have to say after that. So that's one thing in terms of, and then about the heart and mind. Sometimes the questioner said, sometimes something is wrong, but you really can't convince your heart to avoid it. When we talk about this, we say al-fitnatu naw'an. Fitna is of two types, right? There's shahawat and then there's shubuhat. This type of problem where the person's saying, it's registering in my mind that I really shouldn't be doing this, but I can't shake it off. I'm so inclined towards doing it, I can't stop. That person has a problem of shahwa. And the solution for shahwa and desire is to actually, this heart needs to be remedied. This heart needs more spirituality, needs more dhikr, needs more positive influencers within. That's the only thing that's going to weaken the influence of a shahwa in the heart. So I would say that's the relationship of the heart and mind. The mind handles the misconceptions, the heart handles the desires, and the only way you could really make progress is if you address both. Allahu A'lam. There's other ones here.
Okay, it's on the topic of women's responsibilities in the household. So the questioner says, in the family, the household responsibilities for women is to maintain and raise the kids. For the men, it is to provide. What is the view of the woman who has a full-time career and cannot maintain her Islamic household responsibilities?
So the first part of that question, that dynamic is which one?
The questioner is saying that the woman's role is to maintain and raise the kids, and the men should provide. And so then what should you do with the woman who has a full-time career and is not maintaining what he's saying is her Islamic household responsibilities?
Yeah, I would say culturally and traditionally speaking...
Shouldn't say he, and I don't know if it's a he actually, but...
yeah, he or she. Yeah, actually we don't know. So traditionally, culturally speaking, people have that set up, okay? I just got to bring the money home. It's her problem and her responsibility to take care of everything else. That's wrong. That's not right. There are certain things that, a girl needs a father in her life. A son needs a father figure in his life too. This corrupt, bankrupt idea. Where do we get the model of tarbiyah from? It was the Prophet ﷺ. Was he a guy or a girl? What, if I'm a guy, I'm too big to do tarbiyah, that's a woman's job? What was the Prophet ﷺ feminine? Hasha wa kalla. Where do we get the model of tarbiyah from? It's from the Prophet. Anyone who does that is utterly bankrupt in terms of their true understanding of what the Prophet ﷺ is about. The Prophet ﷺ was the first murabbi. He's the one who sat down and, with his children, with the family members of his household. He's the one who sat with them with young children. Even when you look at Anas ibn Malik, or Anas ibn Malik's brother Umayr, like the story of the bird, you guys might know it. He's the one who sat with them and taught them, and gave them perspective on things. This is utterly bankrupt for someone to think that it's enough and okay for me. أنا بس علي أجيب الفلوس. That's it. I brought the money home. That now I relax. That's it. This person, he shouldn't blame anyone but himself if when his children are 15 years old, they have no respect for him at all. He did that to himself. Because when they're 15, 16, 17, okay, bye-bye. We don't need your money anymore. I'm going to get a job and get my own money. Khalas. I don't need you. Right.
Well, then to follow up on this, and actually this probably should have been brought up in the topic, because it's the conflict and struggles between the husband and wife is part of family struggles. I guess I just kind of looked at it as a separate topic because it's a long topic, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think, okay, well, so I think your response there can be summarized as there is more to the man's responsibility than to provide.
Yeah.
Is there any truth in this questioner's statement that there is some sort of division of responsibilities here, that the woman should have something that we'll call whatever household responsibilities mean, and the man has a different responsibility? And I think there's an implication here that they're saying that the woman's shouldn't be putting her career above other responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a certain financial responsibility that the husband has, of course, to the wife and to the children. That's no doubt. The wife does not have those financial responsibilities. In our day and age, and this is important for sisters to understand, in our day and age, a lot of people choose to live as dual income households. The mother and the father both work. In our deen, this is not something required. And sometimes the situation is that the husband requires his wife to work and spend. And I've heard of situations where the husband's requiring his wife to spend 50-50. Everything, she has to pay 50% of everything. في أي دين, you can't require someone to give sadaqah. You can't require someone to give charities. It's a charity for her. She could choose to give it if she wants. But you can't do that. You can't make your wife work and then take her paycheck. There's some lousy examples like that too. Some guy lets his wife work and then he puts her paycheck in his pocket, right? Anyway, the examples go on and on. But can she choose to work if he is okay with it too? That's a different discussion. Yeah, that's possible. Is this bit-taradi? Is there a certain cookie-cutter model where this is how a family needs to function? No, there isn't one in our deen. This is something that's influenced by culture. In some cultures, it's absolutely honorable and expected that the woman takes care of the home and she dedicates her life to that. And that's okay. That's fine. And that the husband's responsible for work. In other cultures, no. Both work. This goes back to culture, thaqafa, a'raf al-nas. This is something that there's no clear halal and haram about. The only thing that there is clear guidance on is wujub al-nafaqa ala al-ab wal-zawj, and also that anything that the woman gives is considered sadaqah. That's the parameters that we have. Beyond that, it's left to people's agreement and their taradi. Yeah.
Okay, I could ask questions about this all night, but I think there's probably other questions, right? So I'll leave that. We'll say that there'll be another probably lecture about that topic, about the husband-wife roles and responsibilities or something like that. Inshallah.
Maybe we can make this the last question.
Okay. Inshallah will be the last question, then inshallah we'll break and you can have the refreshments and the social time, inshallah. Okay, I'll read it as is again. Is it wrong to expect a close friend to cut someone off that personally hurt you? Shouldn't there be a sense of loyalty to the value of the friendship? I personally wouldn't consider someone a good friend if they're actively being friends with someone who hurt me purposefully. Is this wrong? Okay, I think I understand it now. I don't know if you already did. But I think the questioner is saying, someone hurt me. I wanted my friend to cut them off because out of loyalty to me.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the answer would vary based on like the nature of what you're talking about, But I guess in a general sense, I would say this culture of cutting people off and putting an X on people needs to really stop. It's so easy for people to make dua against each other, and it's very bad. Sometimes a person, you just blow in a person's direction, they'll make dua against you. I'm being sarcastic, but it's unfortunate. Sometimes any little friction, it happens. Just because of a little bit of friction, someone would go 6 months, a year, or years not talking to this person. Oh, this person hurt my feelings, right? Sometimes, it's a little bit too much. It should not be easy for me to cut someone off. Well, unless, we're talking about something like that's ongoing, we're talking about oppression, we're talking about abuse, we're talking about something else in that regard, that's different, but if I'm talking about just a general conflict and all of a sudden I'm no longer friends with fulan or fulana, and if you're my friend, you wouldn't be a friend with this person either, I would say that if it's something ongoing and it's something relating to abuse and oppression, I can understand and relate to it. But if it's not ongoing, your experience, you have a relationship with person A, and I have a relationship with person A. Maybe person A, you guys did not see eye to eye. You guys weren't friends, or that person did something that wasn't very nice. It shouldn't corrupt that relationship with everyone else either. No, it shouldn't. Why? Why should I all of a sudden turn my back on person A if this person's completely fine with me, and it's not like they did something that was utterly oppressive, or they're continuing to do an act of aggression? If they're doing constant aggression and abuse, that's different. I can understand that. So I guess the answer to this question would vary. But as a principle, I shouldn't be in the very easily cut people off, and I shouldn't expect people to cut people off just because I don't like them. That's not something reasonable to expect. I don't have a good relationship with fulan, stop talking to. People do this all the time. I think that's why the question came. They do this a lot, and no, it's okay. Things aren't clear black and white all the time. If they're clear black and white, and you're talking about zalim and mazlum, then maybe I'll understand. But if you're talking about regular worldly differences, we need to be a little easier.
Well, I think to close, and if this is too long of a thing we should just close at this point, 'cause it might be long. But I think it gets to what does it mean for it to be loyalty? Because the person's saying, well, as a loyalty, if I cut someone off, my friend should also do that out of loyalty for me. So I think, what does it mean for Islamically to be loyal to somebody?
I think to be loyal to someone means to be a good advisor, to be a good supporter, to be a person who helps them reconcile when reconciliation is needed, to help them manage difficulties when managing difficulties. That's how I define loyalty. Some other people define loyalty as, well, you need to believe what I believe and support what I support, and you need to like who I like and hate who I hate. That's not friendship, that's dictatorship. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we can close on that then, right? So, inshallah, now for the rest of the time, there'll be food on this side for the men and that side for the women. Feel free to stay here. I mean, we'll close it around 9. I think the babysitting might end around 9-ish, but of course, feel free to stay as long as you like. And if you do want to volunteer, we are trying to have a increased sense of community here at the masjid. COVID's now ending. We're trying to bring the community back. We're trying to make this so it's a place where people are coming and feel a sense of community and bonding. So do come, and if you want to be part of the volunteer group to help do things in this community, please come and see any one of us. We are looking for men and women to help volunteer.
I just add one thing. I think, Asil, if you could raise your hand in the back over there. Were you going around with the QR code? Yeah? All right. So please, Jazakallah khair, Asil, for doing that. We want to hear back from you guys. So scan that QR code. Give us feedback. We tried something different than we did last week, and we hope to keep on doing that. We want to keep it creative. We had like a discussion format. We want to hear suggestions from you. Sometimes we'll be doing a family night. Just family night. We'll do activities. There won't be a talk. On other times we might do Q&As. We might be doing that soon. But we want to get different ideas about what you think would be nice for us to do collectively. We might do breakout groups and have discussions in smaller circles. So let us hear from you, and help us make this really special, because it's it's all of us together in this one.
Yeah, and
do the thing.
So Asil will be going around for the men. For the women,
It's
many
off.
did it. I know, but they can still hear me. I'm just guessing. For the women, a lot of people did it last time. Not gonna be someone going around. Shal, you'll see the paper, the QR code
No, it's
over
right
there. If you see the paper with the code, feel free to scan it and do what it tells you to do. I guess. Okay, that's it.
جزاك الله خير. بارك الله فيك.